Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's discussion, our town hall discussion, Community Organizing After the Election, a Grassroots Perspective. Hi, my name is Jasmine Williams Washington. I am co-moderating today's discussion along with my colleague, Kian Lee. Before we begin today's conversation, I just would like to center today's conversation and talk about what exactly is community organizing. Well, in a nutshell, community organizing is all about shifting power, right? Shifting power from the usual decision makers to those that are most affected. So, if there's an issue in your school, your local school, that is directly impacting you. If you have an issue around Medicaid expansion and access to healthcare in your state, that's impacting you. And so it's all about shifting power to those that the issue affects the most. Before we move forward, I just want to say that this is a town hall discussion. It is a discussion. We want to hear from you. And if you have any questions for our panelists, I ask that you drop those questions in the Q&A box below. And now we will introduce our panelists, our esteemed panelists. Fernando.
Hi, everybody. My name is Fernando Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the Border Network for Human Rights. I'm calling from El Paso, Texas, right at the border. We're very close to New Mexico also. And probably, as you might imagine, the issues of the border and immigration have been not only in the national news, but also it is part of the national political debate. So we have been working at the U.S.-Mexico border for close to 22 years already. We had we had dedicated most of our organizing, most of our strategies to actually bring families together, to organize them, to develop community leadership, to deal with these issues of what we call militarization of the border and border communities, criminalization of immigrant families. When you heard that children are being put in cages, that's what criminalization should looks like in terms of dealing with immigrant families at the border. So we had dedicated a lot of time to not only organize, but also developing proactive responses to both local practices and policies, but also national political and policy debates. I mean, we are looking forward to engage in immigration reform, but also in enforcement accountability. So those are some of the general issues that Border Network is working on.
Thank you, Fernando. Jared.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys for having me today. My name is Jared Turner. I am the CEO of Jefferson Stevens LLC, Mississippi-based consulting firm. We do nonprofit and political consulting throughout our state and nationally. And I'm really glad to be here to talk about community organizing because that's a something that's near and dear to my heart. I've been in political organizing or nonprofit organizing for about 13, 14 years now. And quite frankly, it's the only job I've ever had. So um, I'm looking forward to the discussion. I won't go into a lot of detail about that because I'm sure we'll get into it in the conversations. But uh, I have a beautiful wife and two kids, and they take up most of my time when I'm not working.
Thank you, Jared. Helena.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Helena Wong, and I come out of community organizing in New York City around housing, police violence, immigrant rights. In my day job currently, I am the director of an organization called Seeding Change, an organization dedicated to building the leadership and skills of young Asian Americans who want to get involved in community organizing. But today, I'm not wearing that hat. I am speaking as an individual and talking a lot about some of the work that I've been doing with Seed the Vote nationally.
Thank you. And Garland Yates.
Hello, everybody. My name is Garland Yates. Um, I live outside Washington D.C. In Prince George's County. Prince George's County is famous for being one of the largest urban Black counties in America, and also for somehow we have this tag of Black folks living in Prince George's County, uh, live in one of the wealthiest Black counties in the country. I don't know where it is, where the wealth is. Um, and I've been living here for about almost 40 years, or a little over 40 years. I'm not going to get into too much detail about my work because I have a bio, I think, attached someplace. I will simply say this. I was born and raised and grew up in the Jim Crow South. I proudly proclaim myself as a member of the Emmett Till generation. For you younger folks who may not understand Emmett Till, what that means, you can Google that and find out. Um, I am the proud grandfather of three kids, three grandchildren, and the proud father of three. I've done this work. I will say this and then close that. I've done this work at multiple levels and in multiple countries, including Europe and Africa and Canada here. And regretfully, to say this in terms of the numbers could always overwhelm me, but I've been doing this for almost 45 years. Um, so I'm real pleased to be here and share this platform with Fernando and these other folks here, and myself look forward to learning something.
Thank you. Okay, let's hop into the discussion. Our first question, Fernando, and to the other panelists, feel free to answer, follow up. What are the main issues that you are currently organizing around? And depending on which party is elected to the White House, how do you think it will change?
Yes, thank you. That is actually a very important question. Let me just put briefly a background of what we are organizing around at the border. Um, we call ourselves a human rights organization, working with border communities and immigrant communities, developing leadership within border residents, but also building community structures where families can engage permanently in trying to resolve some of their problems. That for 30 years, we had suffered, as I mentioned, the imposition of a system that has treated the border differently from the rest of the nation. At least that was true for some years ago. I believe that the nation is becoming more like the border now. But I think let me say that what we are seeing at the border, it is a fundamental attack against human and civil rights. I mean, when you have a community that have thousands of police armed as enacting as military, when you have the deployment of the National Guard, when you have active duty soldiers deployed within our communities, along with the immigration enforcement agencies, then you'll talk about a full militarization of a region within the United States. So for us, that is a major challenge. The second one, it is that you had heard about the fact that this administration and some previous administration also start building walls, border walls, uh, with uh, with no purpose at all. I mean, those walls represent the worst of our immigration strategies, but also they are sending a message that actually are telling immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers that they are not welcome into the United States. I mean, that is fundamentally changing a historic pattern of the United States being a welcoming country. At the same time, you see children in cages. I mean, how come we got to the point that our society, accepted the fact that we're putting children in jail, in cages? So obviously, all of that represents a major organizing strategy for us. I mean, we had been responding to it, but for us, these elections are going to be very crucial because these elections are not going to be, and I honestly believe these are not going to be just choosing a new president. from one party or the other. I think these elections are larger than that in many ways, because I think what is in the debate, in the public discussion, is what this country is going to be for the next 30 years. And clearly for us, and from this perspective, from border and immigrant communities, either we're going to follow the path of accepting that immigrants are criminals, accepting that immigrants represent a threat to the United States, that we need to build walls, that we need to persecute people of color, that repression and the use of force is the only option, or really we're going to have to deal with accepting the idea that immigrants represent also the future of America. And I always bring back this idea that this nation actually glorified at some point the Statue of Liberty, and Ellis Island has the symbol of a melting pot, a nation of immigrants. Well, I believe that that is what is at heart in the result of these elections. Either we're gonna accept that the border it is gonna be a place of opportunity, that immigrants in the other side of the border, waiting there in refugee camps, they have the same hopes as the ones that came 100 years ago through Ellis Island, and therefore they're gonna contribute to this country. So in that sense, what we're expecting is, if we have two options. If we have an administration that is different to what we have today, we're going to be doing a lot of immigration reform discussions in the next few years. So immigration reform will be on the table again. Immigration reform with all of its aspects of it. And also for us, coming from the border, enforcement reform. And bringing accountability not only to federal agencies, but also local agencies, to create the accountability mechanisms for law enforcement in the nation. So I think those are the two priorities that I see that are going to be very critical for next Congress. But if we have more of the same for the next 4 years, I think that would represent a major challenge for our communities. I think that represents that we need to build a stronger resistance. And when I say that, is the way that is in my mind right now to understand it, is that if a bully, you give a bullying in any school, you give them an award,
Yeah.
you know what you're gonna expect for the
Right.
next 4 years. The intensification of these white supremacy, racist agendas, especially against people of color, but specifically against immigrants. So I think for us, we are gonna deepen the organizing in both scenarios. We need organizing, but one is gonna be more proactive, trying to change policy, and the other one is gonna be to protect our basic rights. I mean, that is gonna be the difference of whoever wins the next election.
That is very interesting. The difference between being proactive and reactive is the difference for you, depending on who takes the White House this Tuesday. The Helena, can you tell me about what you're organizing around right now, and how, if at all, will it change depending on who takes the White House?
Sure. So I think before I do that, I feel like it always needs to be said that this country was founded on white supremacy, genocide, slavery, exploitation, and oppression, and built through labor, blood, and sweat, right? And it's really important to lay this out because it gets to where we are today. If the divisiveness that exists, the state of our current electoral system was built on the way that this country was founded. And so for me, in the community work that I've done in my life around police violence, for example, around inequities in housing, all of these inequities exist because of the structural racism that's been embedded in every institution that exists in this country. And so I feel like for me, the community organizing will always take place no matter who is in office. I do agree with Fernando around the what changes is the terrain with which we're fighting on, right? Whether we're offensive or defensive, what opportunities exist for us under a Biden administration versus what opportunities exist for, well, actually, what challenges and continued rollbacks we need to continue fighting under a Trump administration. For the Asian and Asian American community, which is very diverse and it's not monolithic in any way, and the challenges are very different. I would say that a lot of the issues around immigration, around workers' rights, economic opportunities, all of that, I think will be challenges moving forward. And I think that a lot the work that folks have been doing in the community folks have been doing under a Trump administration, right? And we will continue to do that regardless of which administration goes on. The community organizing that's existed has existed regardless of whether Democrats or Republicans are in power.
Thank you for that. And what I hear that is so interesting is the dynamics between two different groups, but the issues and the challenges within these communities are the same across racial lines. So how can community organizing be used to actually bring more people of different races together and classes together, understanding that there are limits, but also understanding that the challenges that we face are similar? Jared, Garland, do you have any insight there?
Yeah, I'd be glad to let Mr. Yates go. I think you might be on mute.
I am sorry. I did start talking, Jared, but I was on mute. Thank you, my brother. Can you support? I was just going to weigh in briefly, though, and just say on that score, I think that I don't know how we can do this without community organizing, period. I mean, I've put it around, I've thought about it, but I can't come up with another way. But we have to be careful not to overlook the truth that there are no cookie cut approaches in organizing that are going to work everywhere. So in terms of the relationship between our work and the future on an individual level, I think we've got to look at community organizing as a science and a discipline from which we can learn how to build power and capacity among people. I can't think of it any other way. I'm convinced that community organizing is there for that purpose, and that because we all come from different cultures, different orientations, that we have to take that wisdom and knowledge and refine it in a way so that it builds power within the space that where we work. I would just say this about this first question that you asked. So just quickly, I am optimistic and hopeful. I hope Fernando and Helen are absolutely right. And I do think that this election is going to may create some opportunities where people who have been marginalized and isolated before may have some more voice. My worry, though, and I would caution, is that there's a revolution taking place in the Democratic Party as well, and needs to. It is long overdue, and that we have to be prepared to weigh into that. The Democratic Party, as it is constructed, is not going to get us to where we need to get to. And so we will have to be a part of that struggle as well.
Yeah, so if I can just jump in on the first question and just say, I think all of us that do this work understand that it really doesn't matter who's in office, right? The problems, the systemic problems, the systematic problems, whatever word you want to use or however you want to use it, is going to be there regardless of who's in office, because these things are ingrained in our society. They're ingrained in the creation of our culture. And so when you talk about those systemic issues, yes, we can change those things through engagement in voting and moving people around. But those systematic things that have been put in place to make sure that people are marginalized on a very, very major level, we have to just almost break up the system. And so when you ask me, is there going to be change? I think I tell people sometimes uh, I have like probably the worst job in the world because I have to fight against oppression. And once oppression is over, I won't have a job. I'll be working at McDonald's, right? All of us will be. But because of these systemic and systematic changes, I think we'll all be in very well employed for the near future. When it comes to diversity, we have to really start talking to people where they are. And I think if you talk to people, whether they're white, black, rural, or urban, you will understand that those people have the same issues. They want to feed their family. They want access to economic justice. They don't want to be profiled by the police. They don't want to be subjugated to different types of violences that may occur in their community. And once we can wrap our heads around the fact that we are more alike than we are not alike, we will get to a point to where we can all fight in the same regard. But we also have to understand that there is sometime a common enemy, and understanding that the enemy of my enemy is my friend in a lot of respects, and joining at the table with those people is more advantageous than trying to go at it alone. So I hope that during this conversation, I'm enjoying listening to some of y'all because some of the work that I have an opportunity to do is wrapped around some of those immigrant issues, especially in Mississippi. Um, it's really hard to make people understand that we are all in this together, and as long as we can fight in the same direction, then we are better off.
If I can jump just in with a comment on this topic, because this is very important. Um, in the time that we've been organizing at the border, which is not being easy. I mean, we that for us means organizing in a militarized zone with the implications of that. I mean, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty for families to actually even express their opinion and voices. But at the end, we were able to organize. I think it's just an example that communities are so resilient, and they don't throw the towel. I mean, they come together if you offer the platform, but also the mechanisms for organizing. And organizing it is difficult. It is not easy, and I think that is why we don't see that many organizing efforts. I mean, we see less and less because it is not easy. But it's important to say also this, that in the 22 years of organizing, I never seen as clearly as I see today the opportunities of connecting the struggles, but also the organizing efforts of multiple communities of color.
Yeah.
I think in the past we were working in silos. I mean, we always talk about that. I mean, how everybody just choose a topic and an issue, and we came together. But I think we never saw those systemic issues that were affecting everybody that we are seeing today. And I think this idea of organizing, yes, in the short term to push an agenda, an issue, a congressional bill, a legislation, fine. But I think I see the long term how I think we have the table ready for that multiple sector cross organizing processes, because we clearly see those systems that are impacting issue of our communities.
Fernando, actually, I want to pick up on something that you all have said. I think the idea that there is this opportunity for cross-racial, cross-ethnic, cultural organizing. Two is that I think, what Garland said, that there's no cookie cutter, right, to this. And I think what Jasmine pointed out is that there's so much in common between every group that are struggling and the same challenges. So out of curiosity, what do you each think has to be unique in how you organize in your specific community? And what do you think, how do you frame to your communities that you're organizing in, that the fact that these systemic issues affect more than just them, but also other groups that are oppressed? Open that up.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that, I think we do have to have some very unique things that we talk about in our communities. But I speak to groups all the time, and I say, um, as an African American man, I understand the fear that some people have around policing in our country, and my heart breaks for families like George Floyd and those. But as a father, um, raising a black daughter and a black son, I understand also the issues of how we treat women and how children are treated at the border. And we just have to learn as a community. And this is one of the things I think we do in organizing, and we teach each other how to empathize with each other. You don't have to be African American to understand the plight of African Americans. You just have to empathize with their position. And some of those things just happen naturally. Some of them don't happen naturally. But the learning process and teaching and learning and engaging with each other is what brings us all together.
So I would just chime in, Keon, just to add a note to this. One of the things about all of this that we've learned, at least I've learned, is how the fallacies of what we've been taught about our democracy and how it works. These things like that no one is above the law and that we're all in it together. And really what was happened to us over the last 4 years, our democracy has been weaponized against us. And so if it is going to be useful, or if we believe in any of these ideas, then we've got to try to work at restoring that. And it's a long journey. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But we have to start in our work at the community level to give these ideals some life and reality. I'm amazed, and in my head, I just lower my head and I watch, they call them norms, but we were taught in school that democracy had certain basic tenets, or our democracy was supposed to. And as a person of color, we experienced most of it as a lie anyway. But now we can see the rawness and the sheer kind of lie that or a bunch of lies that we've been fed. But if we think it's a useful thing, then we've got to take it back and start at the grassroots and rebuild it.
And I think for me to add to this last question, I feel like it's really, really important to talk about what we have in common, but then also to understand a little bit more of the nuance of each of our communities, which is not something that we're taught in school, right? It's something that we have to build and work at. We actually have to work at building relationships within our communities and also with outside of our communities. And I say this under the current administration, there's been a lot of COVID-19 racism, anti-China bashing, right? And the effects of this are real. Like people, Asian people, regardless if they're Chinese or not, are being physically hurt on the streets, right? And so then some people in the community say, well, then we need more policing. And then it's our job as community organizers to be like, wait, actually, let's talk about safety without police, because policing affects communities in different ways, right? And so then what I think it's the work that we have to do is so it's not just a one-time conversation thing, right? But it's really understanding like what are the values that undergird our communities, and then working from like, okay, if we want safety, what does that look like? What are alternatives? And educating people in our community who may be recent immigrants who don't understand a lot of the history of policing at the border or in housing projects, right, on the streets, why folks are organizing against the police and calling for defunding the police. And that is something that, for example, people in my community have been doing and need to continue to do for the long run.
Just want to make a comment on that briefly, if I may, is that you know, the system works very well. I mean, when I say that is that it's having its impact in multiple communities in pretty much almost the same way. And for many, many years, we were not able to see it. But for example, when we actually heard the name of George Floyd, here in El Paso was immediately related to Eric Salas Sanchez, a Hispanic that was killed inside his home in front of his mother with 3 bullets in the back. So the system works like that because in both cases, impunity won. There was no accountability, there was no oversight. I mean, it was part of the same violence against our communities. Or for example, you remember, I think that was Portland. I mean, there were a lot of activity and protest in Portland. If you remember, who was the first line of police repression in Portland? It was the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol trained in our communities to actually provide and give violence to our members of our community. Border Patrol was sent to Portland to crush and repress peaceful demonstrations in Portland. What I'm saying is that the system is becoming more clear in terms of that that its system doesn't discriminate in the way that they share repression and violence against our communities. And we talk about that. I mean, within our families, the way that we talk about the connections of our suffering with other communities also has given us this vision of this framework that we call it human rights. I mean, because we believe that, I mean, for example, Border Network don't believe that we have immigrant rights. We had human rights for this community, human rights for this other community, and therefore human rights in terms of narrative had been the connecting, organizing framework, because communities at the border or in Chicago, they suffer not only police brutality, but also labor abuses, housing, healthcare. I mean, we are connected in the exploitation. We're connected in the poverty of our community. I mean, the connection between poverty, criminalization, and militarization happens across communities. So I think for us, keep talking about it. And also, as a conclusion of that, is say, if we don't come together, we're going to lose. If we come together through organizing processes, we're going to win. So I think it is important to keep that conversation.
Thank you. And so I want to kind of follow up with that because I'm hearing about the different how you all are dealing with um, organizing in these challenges within the community and the needs within your community, and then the need to actually come together to show more power or additional force of power, right? Um, how has this current and we know that 2020 has been a heck of a year, right? So has 2020 presented opportunity for that to happen? As we hear, we hear police injustice, we hear police brutality, but has there been opportunities? Have you all actually worked with organizations that you would not have worked with previously? And if so, what did you work together on, and what was the impact of that? And that's to each of you.
Well, I will just jump in. Maybe if I start running my mouth, some other people, some ideas will come to people on that. Um, I'm. It's been interesting because what I've been been drawn into situations more that involves a lot of um, different kinds of institutional stakeholders in ways that I would not have been ordinarily. Banks, some other kind of social institutions. Um, in my own town, though, what I'm more, what comes to mind more when you ask that question is that I have noticed a number of different kinds of organizations that are not necessarily in the social justice space, women's clubs, kind of social clubs, garden clubs, have been tuned in to this whole issue of racial justice, and some of the inequities that this coronavirus has exposed in ways that I don't think I'd noticed before, and with an eagerness that has been new. And so it's kind of touchy in terms, because I feel like I'm in a new space in a way, and trying to work within a whole nother set of boundaries that frame relationships. But it has been interesting because the focus has been about community building. And in our case, it's been about redefining what we as a community mean as safety, to sort of stem the tide or address for some of the rising kind of concerns around inappropriate or unacceptable police behavior. So it is not so much groups, but except for these institutions, but I'm more intrigued by and stimulated by the different kind of voices that are coming together in our town from the different orientations and they're all leaning into with a level of authenticity and sincerity around questions of race and racial justice. Unlike, that's sort of what Fernando and Helena mentioned earlier, in ways that did not happen before. So I think there's some hope there, but also there's some new learning for me about how to build relationships in these kind of diverse situations.
We had an example here in El Paso, Texas. I mentioned Eric Salas Sanchez, but also 33 others that were either died or were killed under police custody in the last 10 years. And we had been working a lot on the issues of Border Patrol, ICE, and immigration. That's at the federal level. But we never necessarily engaged as proactively in terms of local police accountability. And it happens that actually we, very organically, we start coming together with groups and sectors that we did not work before in a permanent campaign. I mean, we had some conversations, we had some ideas, some debates, but this idea of this goal of Black and Brown alliance was not necessarily real before. I mean, we knew about it, we wanted to happen, but it wasn't until now that happened. And little by little, we built this coalition that it's a very important coalition that is called the El Paso Police Department Accountability Task Force that launched this accountability campaign for local police department. And this coalition, it is integrated by young people, old people, professionals, farm workers, but very importantly, by members of both Hispanic and Black communities. And that is something that actually we always wanted to do. But it seems that something happened in 2020. No, it was not only the reaction to COVID and the exclusion that happened during COVID, exclusion of communities of color, but this idea that the systemic racism, the systemic violence was impacting both communities. Now it was concretized with the integration of this coalition. We have in that coalition we had the Links, which is the League of Black professional women that actually they came in force to this coalition. We have, for example, the faith-based community represented by Pastor Grady and others that been working on these issues for many years within the Black community that now integrated this task force. And for us, it's been a learning process. I mean, we don't have anything. We always thought about building this brown and Black coalition, and we always thought about how would we do it. But in reality, it's until it happens, you really start realizing not only how powerful it is, but also how we are learning from each other. And I think we're building relationships that we didn't have before, but I believe that we're more powerful in terms of community organizing than before.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback, I think, quite frankly, the president has allowed us some opportunities to all be disenfranchised in several ways. He is a all-encompassing president in his hate, and and brings a lot of divisiveness as it comes. But I give you an example of a couple of things that we've done in the Mississippi. I have the fortunate uh, position of having done some work with some education advocacy groups. And although we have been doing education advocacy, one of the big things that happened to us in 2019 was the policing of our Hispanic brothers and sisters at work, where they were going in and doing raids at different uh, facilities and arresting these people. And the education community and the education advocates got involved because they were arresting these parents at work and their children were stranded at school. And so it's one of these things where all of our what you do to one person affects. It's like a ripple effect. You throw a stone into a lake, and it um, does not just affect you. And so what we've learned to do here, or trying to learn to do, is to understand just that. What happens to one group doesn't just happen to that one group. I live in a very impoverished community where I live, and a lot of the problems that we see affect those things: education, healthcare. And so it's allowed me to be in a lot of different places with people that aren't just um, focused on one thing or the other. But most of the work that I do is trying to link that uh, position where you are to the electoral politics, meaning the people that we elect make the decisions that affect us on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
And so driving that home to people and for the individuals that can engage in electoral politics uh, is so important because at the end of the day, if we still have the same elected officials doing the same things, we will always be pushed into this marginalized box.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to follow up with that question, we have a question from the audience. What are the strategies and tactics that can work under the pandemic and the potentially violent social injustice backlash
If
that
you,
can come?
Sure.
Anyone?
I was going to say, if Helena wants to answer that.
Okay.
Start with her.
Yeah. So first, I'll say something to the last question, and I will then address this question. I think I agree with the panel of the other panelists. I feel like though I don't want us to also invisibilize that there have been multiracial cross community organizing for a really long time, and that this is not the first time. Just because of a Trump administration that people are coming together, but that for many different communities on many different issues, folks have been working together. And so I think what does need to be said is that that needs to be scaled up, right? The organizations and the communities need more resources to be able to work together more, and it needs to be done on a larger level. And we can actually learn so many lessons from work that has already been done and continues to happen. So that's the first part. The second part around strategies and tactics that can work under this pandemic and under, okay. So I feel like there's so many things that we can do. I mean, that's the beauty of community organizing, because it comes from our heart, it comes from our lived experiences. And as long as we are breathing, we can organize. And so I think like what I think about right now, for example, is around the vote. People kind of really thinking creatively and thinking about how do we manage safety, right? How do we think about ensuring that every vote counts, especially kind of moving into this next period. And so I'm really super inspired by things like Joy to the Polls that the election defenders are doing, for example, where right now it can seem very scary to go to the polls because of all the stuff that we're hearing about voter intimidation and voter harassment. And so to have folks actually come up with a plan of de-escalation, of bringing joy to the polls as a way of countering that, I think is super powerful. And I think that that the kind of energy and spirit that we need to continue in this next period, especially as I think we're going to be in a scenario where we're not going to know the results of the elections for a while, that we continue to bring righteous resistance, right? That we have a right to have our vote counted, right? And we do that in a way that speaks to what our that speaks to kind of the values that we have, and the way that we want to show presence on the streets, right, and in our communities.
You know, I'd take a little piece of this question this way, that you posed, the second part of it. One of the most encouraging things that I've seen in this so-called social era of so much social unrest, is that the way white people are leaning into these conversations about justice and racial equality, is at a different level. I remember in my childhood that freedom riders and eventually white people cheered on a little bit from their living room. But what I'm seeing here with these people getting in the street and getting their heads cracked, to me suggests that there's some potential there to maybe venture off into these racial matters and inequities in ways that we've never done before. And setting up forums and opportunities to do that is what I think is a big challenge. The cross-cultural stuff, strengthen it, but we really.
Did we just lose Garland? Garland, I think we just lost you.
Lost audio.
There we go. You went out, you cut out just for a few seconds there.
While we're does anyone else have a response to that question? Okay. I'm gonna ask another question. And Garland will, when you come back, we're here.
You're on mute. So wait, hold on.
Hold on, wait, is he?
Yeah, he's unmuted and it says, there we go. Are you back, Garland?
I don't know.
There we go.
Yes, you're back. There we go.
Yep.
Maybe somebody's at work in this thing. You know, COINTELPRO revisited. All I was trying to say was, and I'll be simple. All I was trying to say is, I sense some opportunity there. I'm not quite sure how to engage, but I think we got to really not let this moment pass. And as well as we're seeing the stage is set for maybe even venturing into this kind of conversation that we've all trying to dance around about reparations. It seemed like this moment now for us to move into that is here, the opportunity is here, and not letting it pass as an organizer, I think is critical. I'll stop there.
Can I just add one comment to that also, is that, it is true that we had been talking and sometimes even working with the idea of organizing across communities and across sectors for many, many years. But I honestly believe that it wasn't always that clear how that would happen. The Border Network is part of the Poor People's Campaign. We're part of the steering committee, and we understand. For many years we've been saying that we need to build not only the local organizing but also a national agenda, a national platform from all of these processes happening to really push for social change. I think that is at the end. It seems that there's a consensus that we need a social movement to deal with those systemic issues that we're facing, to actually change reality as it is. We are aiming not only at organizing at local level to deal with specific issues. But I think it is clear, more clear now, that the system that is established, the political system, like whoever wins the election, will might open some opportunities, but it will not resolve the systemic issues. So in that sense, where we've been eager to actually create something that is bringing all of us together in some kind of movement. And I think that's where I believe it is coming more real and more tangible. I mean, what we are experiencing by building not only a national coalition with the Poor People's Campaign, but also this local engagement with multi-sectors, uh, I think it is becoming more real. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen next week or next month or next year. I think it's given us the opportunity to work to some kind of unified agenda for the people that is being oppressed by the systems. And I think that's what I see the opportunity. How do you do local organizing with a national aim, not only local organizing for local aims? And I think that is what I believe that there are some of the changes.
So I like that you talk about national change and organizing nationally, because we have another question from the audience that links right into that. How can we advance solidarity work where learning and best practices are shared across movements and cities? How can we do that to get at the most impact and um, build capacity and shift power?
So as the shy one of the group, Jasmine, I'm going to say we can do more of community sciences across the country. I think that is the infrastructure that is there to do that is lacking as it responds to people on the ground and grassroots folks. I know part of what we were trying to do in creating the community democracy workshop is that create a forum and an opportunity for practitioners, grassroots practitioners, particularly people of color, to have a chance to exchange experiences and learn from each other in real time, but that don't have an affiliation with some of these big national networks or access to them. I think that's what we got to concentrate on. The people who are really doing the work have fewer opportunities to interact and coordinate with each other and learn from each other, except in forums that other people convene. I think we have to be much more intentional about helping people convene forums of their peers, and not just the people who do the work, but the people who also are impacted by the work have to be a part of this learning process.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you brought out. I think the resources that a lot of these organizations lack um, puts them in a silo, and that's not always on purpose. I mean, it places them in that. And so, organizations like yours that help people grow are the bellwethers of how we get to the next point. But it's also this thing of feeling like you're always underwater. At the end of the day, a lot of the organizations that I work with, um, they're, you know, head deep in just the struggle that they're dealing with. And so they're trying to figure out where to find time and how to find some type of other avenue to get involved in somebody else's struggle. And so a lot of times that forces the silo, just this inability to break free from what you do. I know one of the things that, um, I always think about is like, man, I should probably start writing. But if you're always working, when do you have time to break free and let your mind wander? I think James Baldwin talked about that in his move from America to France. And he talked about just being free from the injustices allowed him the ability the avenue to grow and to write and to build. And so a lot of our organizations are suffering from that. So
We have about 5 minutes, and I actually want to ask the one last question that's important. So in the current, in this year, since the pandemic and all the civil unrest, philanthropy has stepped in and try to fill some gap. So there are more and more foundations coming out right now, funding, community organizing, power shifting initiatives, systems change initiatives. What do these philanthropies need? What would you like them to know when they're trying to support already existing organizing efforts like you all's?
I can go first.
Sure, Fernando.
I think the first thing that I'm telling them is that investing in organizing is worth it. And when I say that is many of the foundations sometimes they work in this rapid outcome process. I mean, I'm gonna invest and I'm gonna have a result in 1 year. And I want you report, and then I'm gonna give you more money whether you accomplished a major change or either local or national. But sometimes they don't see that truly the true organizing process, it takes time, and it takes a lot of effort and doesn't provide results immediately. Because what we're trying to do is build not only the capacity of our communities, but also build consciousness. I mean, the fact that all communities can see themselves as the subjects to change and to challenge systems, that is not going to happen with a mobilization or with one training. It is going to happen with the internalization that they can change reality. And that doesn't happen from one day to the other. It takes organizing. It takes leadership development. And many times it takes years to accomplish it. And sometimes that process accelerates. But I think some foundations are afraid of investing in community organizing because it's not providing that immediate results. That's why some of them do offer more support to service providers, which is fine. I mean, services are needed. But in this case, investing in organizing will actually be worth it. And I think that is something that some foundations are kind of rethinking and say, yes, we need to build community capacity in permanent community structures in place to deal with those issues.
Thank you.
I think that was amazing. I'm sorry, Mr. Yates. I think that's amazing because we all come from different walks of life, and I was about to say the same thing. We need organizations to invest in capacity building, and not outcome. The reality is that if you're investing in capacity building, it's the old adage: teach a man to fish, or give a man a fish, or teach a man to fish. What we're doing in a lot of respects is giving people who don't have the capacity money to not be able to do a job because they don't have the capacity. And so we're setting a lot of people up to fail. And so we really have to focus on capacity building in these areas. And so it does mean staffing up. It does mean investing in those people's trainings. It does mean making sure that those people have guidance to learn how to do things. Some of the organizations that I work for, they have one ED, and the ED is the fundraiser and the cleaning lady and a lot of other things. And they're the janitor at the end of the day. And so we have to understand that these organizations need capacity to help them grow their work. So I'm so glad Fernando said that.
So I was going to say real quickly, one of the things, Keon, that with philanthropy, I wish they would do is, and we need to lift up more, is to understand that in some ways, philanthropy impedes our work and how they behave in many ways. And I think we need to call that out. I think the power of the money has tended to make us be mute a little bit on that. And I think we got to lift that up. I also think that the systems and protocols that they use to make decisions create this vacuum between people who are doing the work and people who have the money. And so we need to look at this inner layer. Maybe there is some greater use for these philanthropic intermediaries as a way of sort of enabling these foundations with all the power and money and these big bureaucracies to relate to groups with a little less sophistication. And I would just also say that we look to these foundations for money, and we should, but we should realize that on these foundations, on their boards of directors and in their coffers and how they make investments, that their institutions have the ability to have far more impact on these issues that we have than just writing a check. And then the last thing I would say is they ought to be a little bit more careful and draw a harder line between what they know and what they think, how much they think what they know ought to be what we do. So we got to find our voice with these people and learn how to say, as my grandfather would say, how to bite the hand that feeds us, at least by nibbling.
It's hard to follow that. I agree with what all the other panelists have said. The only things I'll add is that foundations only give away 5% of their money every year, and they should consider upping that, right? And the second thing is, you know what, like we have some really cool funders, and we need more cool funders. And foundation, like they also need to be organizing within their own sector to move money to organizing, to move money to communities. And I feel like there's a lot more work to be done versus kind of the answer that I hear a lot is our hands are tied. And communities' hands are often the ones that are like tied, and we still try to make it work, right?
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna pass the baton back over to Jasmine.
Well, I just want to say this was a wonderful discussion. Thank you to our panelists for taking time out of your day and I'm sure you have a lot of things to do on the ground. So thank you. And then also thank you to our viewing audience. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to this conversation. I hope that you're leaving this town hall discussion feeling enlightened and knowing more about what community organizers do and the importance of community organizing in your community, and understand better what you're seeing in the streets across the country and quite frankly across the world at this point. So thank you so much, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful day.